Kendra Prospero, host of How I Turned the Corner. I'm here today live at the Rocky Mountain Total Rewards Conference, bringing you some of the thought leaders that we have here. As a CEO, I get asked a lot about sales, profitability, leading, but I don't think I've ever been asked, what's holding your organization's creativity back? And I'm thrilled to welcome this question and today's guest, Theo Edmonds, because this is the question he asks every leader. He is a culture futurist, artist, a social entrepreneur who has spent over 30 years working at the intersection of creative industries, health science, and technology. And at the heart of his work is one big idea, that creativity isn't just an art, it's a performance driver for business, innovation, and our shared future. Theo, welcome to How I Turned the Corner.
Hi, Kendra. It's great to be here.
Yes, it's great to have you. So you call yourself a creative futurist. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so a culture futurist is, I do a lot of data analytics, whereas some futurists are looking at the impact of what technologies are going to emerge and how those technologies might intersect with each other. I look at it from a little bit of a different angle of how the human side of culture and the technology become co-creators in advancing innovation across all industries, and it could be in aerospace or it could be in the arts.
Okay, so tell me some of the findings you've had that are more recent around this question of, is creativity holding your organization back? What are you hearing from leaders when you ask that?
Yeah, so back up just a little bit, I'll start here. The language that we use to talk about innovation today hasn't really gone through an update in quite a while. And when we think about things like the term data loss on the engineering side, that's going to be more and more, the language of technology is going to guide business strategies. But when the human side looks at something like loss, we perceive that very differently, and our brains certainly do not. We'll get into this, I'm sure. I work with a lot of cognitive neuroscientists and industrial psychologists. And so I've got really interested in where's the language breaking down around how we talk about innovation on the human side. And move fast and break things might work, great in terms of Silicon Valley mantra, but we humans don't break quite the same way that an iPad might.
Right.
And so the language that we use to talk about innovation is due for an upgrade. And back in 2022, I went through a period of profound loss in my own life. In the period of 4 months, I lost my grandmother. The next month, my childhood best friend. The next month, my work wife here in Denver. And then the next month, my mother, to old age, accident, suicide, and brain cancer.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It was hard, and what I found myself doing, as maybe a lot of innovators do, I got hyper-productive, and I caught myself in the middle of it, and I started to disintegrate to that a little bit, and like, what's really going on here? Because I was going through all the motions of innovation. Come to think about it as innovation theater, it was the design sprints, and it was the brainstorms, all the things that we typically do in an innovation space. And so my body was there, my brain was engaged in the work, but my heart just was MIA. And it was through this, I remembered a conversation I had with a Fortune 50 CEO back in 2018. And the day that this conversation happened on, he was a Fortune 50 leader. He was also in the room as a grieving father. And he said, he told me a story that he had lost a child about 18 months before this point. And he had been going through grief. And in the last year or so, he noticed that in his innovation teams in the corporate headquarters, that all of their innovation capacity seemed to be getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And they really couldn't figure out why. They had the consulting firms in there, they had all of the KPIs, the OKRs that they had on there, available to them. And it's a Fortune 50 company, so that it was an immense capacity there. But they still couldn't figure out why they were just incremental in their innovation on their best days.
Right.
And then he said, to me something really profound. He said, as I'm going through my grief, I look at these teams, and to my eyes, they look like they're experiencing some of the same things I am from losing a child. And he said, do you think it's possible that unprocessed grief is causing us to not be able to innovate and perform to the level that the market expects of us? And it was a key, without a lock for me at the time. A very interesting intellectual question. But then in 2022, when I went through my period of loss, kind of the lock and the key met with each other. And so as we look at grief and we look at the brain, what people like Mary Frances O'Connor, which is a neuroscientist, have done in their work, which is, if you don't know her,
yes,
she's an amazing scientist, because she can communicate very effectively. And not all scientists, it's a unique skill.
Yeah.
And so the grief is our brain's relearning process. Our brain is trying to fit new set of facts to what it has expected, right? And so when we think about innovation, you get teams who move fast and fail. You get assigned to a team, you're working for 6 months, 18 months, you get close to a launch, and then something changes in the marketplace. The leadership of an organization changes. And in a period of a week, this thing you have attached your identity and your ego and the thing that you are doing in the world, all of a sudden gets broken apart. We're not going this direction, we're going this direction. The team gets split up, reassigned. New teams get spun up to do different things. We tend to cycle through those kinds of periods in corporate spaces, not just corporate, it's in all large organizations, at a pretty quick rate. And we've got all of the metrics, all of the key performance indicators, all of the processes for managing the project transition. But we really don't have in place are the things that help to manage the people that are transitioning into the new thing they're going to be part of, while at the same time putting to rest the thing that they have been a part of, that they've come to love, that they've come to assign personal value to on some level. And so as you think about kind of how all of this works, is if that goes on long enough, and that loss just keeps building up without us somewhere to go, over time we know from a cognitive neuroscience perspective that is going to decrease what people come to see as possible and valuable in their lives. And so there are real implications to the things that we have said are the personal that we're supposed to keep outside of the office, and the things that mean something in our innovation spaces. When at the end of the day, all innovation has a human component to it. We train people to be confident in their solutions. We reward them to be confident in their solutions when they're bringing them to a market, when they're bringing them to a board to approve. But what we have not done is train people to be curious and vulnerable in the questions that they're asking. That they may not have the right question, and if you don't have the right question, all of the effort you're going to put into it may or may not turn out to be anything significant. 43% of entrepreneurs fail because there's no market for their product.
Right, they didn't explore.
That's a bad question. That has nothing to do, and we've said, no, that's about the team's performance they've done. Right, no, they didn't have the right question at the beginning. And so as we think about artificial intelligence coming online, what we are seeing, my colleagues who are blue chip cognitive neuroscientists, now behavioral psychologists, what we're starting to see is the first empirical data that's showing some really interesting things for knowledge workers who are using something like Gen AI on their day-to-day basis. We're seeing in the empirical research that's coming out, there's a process of cognitive offloading that they're doing in their work with Gen AI. So they're freeing up space, because our brains above all things want to be efficient. That's what our brains are designed to do. And so all this cognitive offloading is happening, and for the more experienced professionals, that cognitive offloading is being replaced with something that kind of looks like curatorial skills of, now that I'm not having to think about these tactical things, my brain is now thinking about, well, what is this body of knowledge over here combined with this body of knowledge over here in this question I'm asking? what happens when you put these two things together? Does it form a new question? So it's a harder thinking that happens. But for younger professionals, less experienced professionals, same cognitive offloading is happening. But what it's being replaced with is trust in the answers that the generative AI is providing it. And so if you think about the implications of that long term, and you scale that up, it's a race to the bottom because everybody has the same access to the technology.
The same prompts, basically.
Yeah, the same prompts. And so if everybody's getting the same input back, which that's how large language models work. It's a regression to the mean, et cetera, on whatever the training data has been based on. So if everybody's got access to the same thing, where do you find differentiated value?
Right.
Which is the name of the game if you're in business, right? And so that differentiated value then is found more in the question than it is in a solution that everybody is also going to have access to. I never will forget, this has been back maybe a year ago, I went to a very well-known Fortune 50 company, had this big entrepreneurial meetup around artificial intelligence. And there was a host of really fascinating ways that AI, not because I'm very tech forward, like I am a big believer in tech. In fact, the question that drives me is, what if AI is there a big chance to make the hard creativity and the work of innovation more human than ever? And I believe that that's the case. But at this particular meeting, there was this host of entrepreneurs, and I've been around for a minute, so I can understand probably what kind of venture capital has gone into these entrepreneurs. I've got an idea around what bets were being made, even if I didn't look at the financials.
Cap tables, yeah.
And so as they're cycling through, and this particular AI kind of event was healthcare related. As they're cycling through, the only difference between them seemed to be, I'm focusing on cardiology or I'm focusing on nephrology and the marketing. That's not really differentiated value, right?
Sure.
And so if we are going to think about AI as a productivity play, and that's where we're going to stop, there's only so far that can go. And if you think about productivity and efficiency, that is an industrial economy model when productivity and efficiency matter, because you wanted sameness. You wanted,
right.
We
kind of had that conversation with Scott before.
Absolutely.
This. Yeah, exactly.
You want widgets to be a widget, no matter if it's in Tuscaloosa or if it's in Tahoma, right?
Right.
But today, that's not necessarily the case. We want our differentiated value to come in a question, to come in the value of discernment around what AI is giving us. And if we can't do that,
it is a race to the bottom.
It is a race to the bottom.
And if AI, the models don't adapt faster too, in terms of potentially the information they're gathering. I mean, there is a little bit of a Moore's law around that, I think, in terms of maybe the speed to which it will adapt, maybe.
Yeah.
But I can definitely see that. I mean, we've gotten applications, so it's very tactical, but we've had job applications come in where we've asked like a couple, like kind of conditioning questions to make sure that they were legitimate candidates. And we've actually gotten the same answer over and over and over, which was like, okay, AI, like obviously this is AI, and it's really stupid, right? Because it's not even adapting from the prompts that it received over and over. You know, we're in the early days of at least ChatGPT. You could you could type in something and it would create something new, and then you could type it in again and it was brand new again.
Yeah.
Like in the early days, because it was learning, it was really experimenting, I felt, with our information that we were feeding it. But now it's already proving to us that it's a race to the bottom.
I'll give you just something to think about. With social media, think about Instagram. It made us look more alike without even trying. That wasn't how the technology was, that's not what the technology was designed to do. The technology was designed to keep us in the loop inside of it. But if you think about like how our Instagram photos and the way that
Like our avatars, you mean?
Yeah, well, no, I'm talking about literally the way we look, the things that we wear, the way we do our, the way hair is done, the way plastic surgery is done.
Right.
People are starting to look more and more.
Teeth, like everyone has the same teeth. That's what
teeth,
I
like
noticed.
all of the, that's just a really easy thing for us all to understand because it's real, right? We see it on Instagram. Here we are with artificial intelligence, because we'll just stay in the large language models, the Gen AI piece. It is designed to force sameness. And so if we can say that differentiated value is important in the future of knowledge work.
And we're not seeing that in the outcome and the output. Yeah, that's interesting.
That's not a productivity question.
Right. Well, so let's tie this back to this conference, even in terms of just, this is a total rewards conference, but the last conversation I had was around how do you actually even compensate people for creative output, let's say. Coming back around, like where are you seeing some trends, like, in the next year around creativity and improving creativity and actually combating this a little bit? Are you seeing some businesses or infrastructure, anything that's just challenging that?
So there's a lot of things that are challenging it, but I don't think it's intentional.
Okay.
Here's what I can tell you is that for anything to be rewarded, we're at total rewards. For anything to be rewarded, it's got to be measurable, investable, and scalable, and repeatable. If it's not,
even with humans,
because if it's not, it doesn't. It may be, I'm talking about creativity, it's got to be, it can't just be about the individual. Personal expression is fabulous. I'm an artist, I'm a huge believer in personal expression, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here, that's small creativity. What we're talking about here is hard creativity of a team who has different educational backgrounds, different ways of talking about the same problem, an engineer and a particle physicist, an MBA, if you're like working in aerospace, for example, are all going to have a different way of talking about the same thing. And so hard creativity, the applied creativity of a team is what we call innovation. And so for that to be invested in, you've got to understand how close you're getting to improvement. The way we typically do that right now is we look at lagging indicators. We say, okay, this team did this last year. Here was their ROI on the project, and that's how we do it, right? Mm-hmm. The world is moving at such a fast rate today. I saw something very recently that, and I always get myself in trouble quoting something without it laying in front of me, but at the estimating that our knowledge base, the computing power of the knowledge base, is doubling about every 3 months. Talking about Moore's law, Moore's law is like
This is
may or may not be.
Right, this is next level.
Right, this is next level stuff. And so, if you're thinking about judging all of your performance based upon the success of the team
in the past,
who feels confident enough that those are going to be the best indicators for knowing where to place your next bet?
Yeah.
They're an indicator, an important indicator, but they can't be all we have.
Right.
And so the way that I've been working with for the last several years with a large group of the top scientists in the U.S. is thinking about, when we're talking about team creativity under pressure, under uncertainty, and converting it into enterprise value, you can't just stop with the brain. You have to have the cognitive neuroscience is incredibly important when you're talking about something like cognitive agility, because that's a big piece of team level creativity. But that can't be all of it, because neuroscientists are focused on individual brains, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about teams. So then you've got to have the industrial and organizational behavioral psychologists who understand team level creativity in real world situations, under pressure, in how it works in different industries, conflict resolution, psychological safety, shared mental models, developing those. But then even after you've got those two things, at the end of the day, it's still a bunch of humans working together. So you've got to have emotions experts and researchers who understand also how emotion impacts not just an individual's creativity, but an individual's motivation to stay in.
But isn't that
when it
what
gets
we've
hard.
always been thinking about?
But we haven't measured it.
Okay.
We haven't put it together using science to actually measure it as a set of leading indicators, a new KPI that can be understood in relationship to a return on investment that's already being calculated as an economic outcome. And so that's the opportunity, is not to completely do away with the lagging indicators, but to take those and say, okay, if your return on investment is going to be X, that's a pretty straightforward calculation. We know what we're going for. You either hit the mark or you didn't based upon how the market responded with your product. You pair that with a set of leading indicators. Creative brain capital is what we call it. So the four vectors of the cognitive agility, emotional resilience, the integrative creative know-how of a group, and then there's a fourth vector around human-machine mastery. So maintaining the differentiated value of your own experience and the questions you ask of the machine. You look at those four vectors, and all those can be measured, but you have to have three different fields of research to do it. But if you measure those, then you've got something that says, well, we don't know what the ROI on this is going to be, but we can look at these metrics and we can say, okay, with this team, they're really good at cognitive agility, but they don't have the trust that they need to stay in it when things get hard.
Right, or the ability to have the difficult conversations to keep things...
successfully manage conflict resolution.
Exactly,
And those things are as real as, as a microchip.
Right.
When it comes to how we deploy innovation, both on whether we're talking about the exploit or explore aspects of innovation. Creativity matters for all those. Creativity is not just like how many ideas can you come up with, how many uses for a brick, right?
Right.
Diversive thinking is important, but there's a convergent process that is also important in creativity, and you've got to be able to toggle between those states at a different time. And so this kind of adaptability, that creative toggle, adaptive coordination is another way to think about it, teams becomes really, really important. And if you're not measuring your capacity to do that as an organization, then you're not going to understand how susceptible your organization is to not being able to metabolize new risk or new uncertainties that enter the market that are absolutely going to impact the outcome.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, okay, well, with then kind of thinking about, the next steps that a leader needs to be taking to get ready for this, I feel like, I'm going to say a couple things, and maybe you can tell me if I'm on the right track. So leaders, good leaders, I'm going to qualify, leaders that actually do want people to be effective, and they aren't just about an exchange of paycheck for time, okay? So I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the leaders that are like, yes, I really do want my team to be thriving. I want my team to be innovating, being creative. I want them to feel like their best self at my company. The focus on psychological safety, team building, emotional intelligence, difficult conversation, conflict resolution, that is still very relevant for getting us ready for the future, right?
Yeah, it very much so.
Okay.
I think where the breakdown in the modern economy happens is often some of the things you've named and others we've conceptualized as individual things. We've not looked at them and how do we fix the individual? How do we support the individual? But what I and my colleagues focus on is how do we build balance into a team that it may be individual X that is going to be the ideal leader in a certain set of market conditions, but it's something that market change is a pandemic, a new technology. It may be other people in the team that might be a better leader in a different contextual situation. And so it's about understanding how you're balancing that team at any given time. And most of the organizational tools that we've had around that for the last, probably 15, 20 years for sure, has evolved around sentiment surveys, employee engagement surveys.
Yeah, in the past.
Yeah, in the past. And those were good tools at the time. But they may be holding us back also in some ways now, because it's not so much about the individual, because creativity happens in teams in the corporate space,
right?
In an organizational space.
Right.
We're talking about team level constructs, and if you focus over-index on the individual and how do I make this individual more creative? That may not be the right question. The idea is, how do you balance this team so no matter what happens, it has got the capacity to respond in a way that moves it from uncertainty into new enterprise value. I used to see this a lot with when we were measuring curiosity in companies back in 2018 and 19. We saw a lot of we saw something very odd happening. Out of 138 different combinations of curiosity, the way we were measuring it or so, that you could have, we kept seeing organizations would have 80%, 90% of their entire organization with the same 4 or 5 curiosity kind of phenotypes. Now those 4 or 5 would change, maybe organization to organization, industry to industry, but
I see. But the same across the company.
The same, and so what the takeaway from there is, like, organizations are doing a really good job at hiring for culture fit.
Right. Oh yeah.
But if one thing changes, that is a foundational assumption that everything has been built around in the marketplace, despite being intellectually honest and wanting what you were just talking about as a leader, the organization hasn't built the bench to go to be able to think different.
So it's so a big thing of what we talk about at my company and with the organizations we support is how important it is to get clear on those behaviors you really expect that basically will translate into values.
Yeah.
And in a way then it's created a bit of groupthink, possibly, where that's maybe why you're seeing those same 5, for example, curiosity modalities showing up in different organizations. We've kind of elevated it to this next level, though, to say you don't want necessarily diversity of behaviors, because I don't, for example, like one of our values is no jerks. I don't want to work with jerks on my team. I grew up with a jerk. I don't need that anymore, right? And so I don't want that. But I also want a diversity of thinking, not necessarily diversity of values, but a diversity of thinking. To say, okay, like, I'm not a very detail-oriented person in the sense of like sitting down and like plowing through spreadsheets or whatever. But I need to surround myself with a lot of people who are detail-oriented. And we also have a really, really creative team. Like, when you look at just the typical assessments, my team is off the charts creative, but you need to balance that with the pragmatic side, I think is what you're trying to maybe say.
I would even frame it a little bit differently. Okay. The pragmatic side is also part of creativity.
Okay, yes, but balancing.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe the balance of these.
Everything we're talking about is balance. And so to balance something, you have to be able to understand what are the metrics you're trying to balance. Like, how do you know your team is creative? And I think 9 out of 10 people that in any space, any industry, would say something very similar to what you just said. My team is creative, but we have to be able to balance the pragmatic side.
Yeah.
From a scientific perspective of creativity, both of those are skill sets within creativity. Context depends on which ones are going to be the most valuable and needed at any given time. And like the way we tell stories in the medium hasn't helped with this. There's a lot of myths about what creativity is and isn't out there. For example, the idea that kids are more creative than adults, that's just patently not true. There's different levels of creativity. There's what's kind of mini creativity, and that is kind of you, Kendra, you've got a recipe that's been in your family, maybe it's your grandmother's. I've got gingerbread is the one that I have. That was my grandmother's. It's famous, right? In our family. Now, I may take that gingerbread recipe that's my grandmother's, that everybody knows, and I may say, you know what? I think I want to put walnuts in the gingerbread. That's mini C creativity. Like, I've done something that's novel, it's useful to me, I've exhibited some kind of creativity. Is it valuable to anyone else? Probably not. So that mini C. But then you kind of keep moving up, and then you've got kind of a professional creativity. This is where we get into everybody from knowledge workers to sound engineers to Hollywood, production studios, people whose professional lives revolve around turning something into a creative adjective product. Creative, the adjective, right? And then you get into kind of what's called transformational creativity, and that's where something comes along that so foundationally changes the questions you ask, or the questions that the industry understands itself around a new technology. Something has happened there that makes those old ways of thinking about what does it mean to do creative work, they don't even matter in the same way anymore. The questions have lost their value even because something transformational has taken place. And so creativity exists all along that spectrum, and so it becomes really important to know what type of creativity and at what level we're talking about. All of them are valuable,
right? But in certain situations, and then directing it a little bit more.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that we kind of know in the neuroscience, for example, and this is my colleague Adam Green, who runs the cognitive relations lab at Georgetown. This is from some of the work that he's done with the Penn State folks and some others. We tend to think about creative as an adjective. It's the creative person. That's a creative product.
I think of it as a verb. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
It's novel, useful.
Right.
Those are kind of like two metrics, and we could talk for years about what each one of those words mean in different contexts. But generally, creative, the adjective. It was assigning some specific type of value to a person, product. But that's not creative process.
Okay.
Creative process is something more. So what's going in, this is kind of swimming upstream. What's before a product and what's before calling yourself creative process. And there's kind of generally, they looked at across the cognitive neuroscience, there's kind of three things. One is intrinsic motivation. You get the idea that you're working on. You produce a higher quality outcome if it has some value, internal directed attention, right? You're the one who wants to work with the idea.
Sure.
You got this idea because it's from this important part of your life, and here's the people you want to work with. So there's an internal energy there. The second piece of the creative process, goal constraints. We have told the story that creativity just needs absolute freedom, like complete. That's not true. Actually, higher quality creativity comes from goal constraints, and that's any of us in the world. There's never really a situation where anybody has complete
freedom, right? There's always a deadline.
There's always always something, and that's real.
Looming.
But goal constraints, and making sure you're engineering goal constraints correctly and in the way that matters. Internally directed attention, goal constraints. And then the third piece of it is generative outcome, meaning that the place that you end, you don't put a period on it. The place that you end leads to a deeper question, leads to the next thing. So the generative outcome is something more than just the sum of all your individual memories and your skills that have led to this thing, and here it is, right? There's a new place it takes you to. But then when you talk to cognitive neuroscience and you ask them, like, where does that internally directed attention, that first thing, come from when it's a team, an industry, a nation? They will all say, well, I'm a neuroscientist, I focus on the brain. So how do you then find that internally directed attention as a team when we've all got different ways of coming to the work and so forth? You've got to have the industrial and organizational behavioral psychologists who know how to do that kind of thing in the industry, right? So creativity is a massively growing field, but the way that the media tells the story about it is not helping right now. And so storytelling really, really matters because we become the stories that we tell. Our brains, being efficient, lean toward that way. And so if the next time you see a media headline says, scientists have discovered the part of your brain that, no, that's not right. Because there's this whole even left brain, right brain is a fallacy. It's whole brain creativity, hard stop.
Nice.
Right? There's different networks. There's the default mode network, which is kind of like, it's how we envision the future. It helps us understand our identity. But default mode's kind of running in the background all the time. Then there's our executive control network, like how do I move this cup from here to here? That's my executive control network. directing a task. And there's the salience network, which gives focus to default mode, executive control, trains coming down the track. I remember that that's probably not a good idea if I stand here, right? And so the salience focuses the executive control and coordinates that action between default mode and net control. So if you think about that's how we know it works in the brain. What I do is I try to look at it as a metaphor across an economy. So if you think about an economy, commerce kind of operates like an executive control mode, like it's very task oriented, it's very transactional, it's very all those things. But then our default mode, that's kind of culture operates like that, because culture is always changing, it's always morphing, culture is always becoming the next thing it's going to be. And this is a metaphor, so it's not, I'm not saying that it's one-to-one, because my neuroscientist friends would scold me for that. So where does that salience event come from? The thing that causes culture and commerce to focus. I think media is actually where that happens, because when media directs us, it causes us to think about a thing a certain way, to feel about a thing a certain way. And so the way we tell stories has great consequence to it, but we've relegated storytelling to marketing.
Right.
The last thing that we do after we know what we want to sell, the creative product. The story. Right? So
that's going to be probably the most important thing then, yeah.
It is, because if we think about all innovation as a story that we tell about how we're going to get from where we are today to where we think we want to be, that's what innovation is. It's a story we tell.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to end. So thank you so much, Theo.
It's been a pleasure.
This has been so lovely. Yes. Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for your time.
Thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today on How I Turn the Corner. And we will be continuing these interviews through the rest of the day. So please keep joining us. Thank you so much.